Hi, this is Tisch Aitken, and it is Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. We are now in a new month, and as I had said for last week, there was a very brief window where all of the planets were direct, although Pluto, which is an outer planet of big power, people that are in power, Pluto is the higher octave of Mars, so it can represent war, major endings and departures. It can represent death and regeneration, and it can also represent big secrets that get brought to light. And it's stationed retrograde on Sunday, May 4th at 3 degrees and 49 minutes of the fixed air sign of Aquarius. And we feel that energy intensified 5 days before and 5 days afterwards. And since all of that's happened, we had last week at Newark Airport, 20% of the FAA employees walked off, and there's a big issue with the security and safety at Newark Airport, and United Airlines has eliminated 35 daily flights and are even recommending that if you can go to alternate airports, that's advisable, not scary. And Aquarius, we look at the planet itself. Well, there were major departures, people leaving the job, but Aquarius, among other things, represents aviation. And so this is something where there has been a lot of attention since the beginning of the year to many plane crashes and safety and many issues with air travel safety. And the other thing was that last week, let's see, Mike Waltz was fired from his position. And then, unfortunately, right now, I guess in the last, I just got brought to my attention, Pakistan struck, India struck Pakistan, rather, sorry. And that's the biggest attack since 1971. And again, Pluto represents people in power, and it can also represent war. Pluto is the higher octave of Mars, and Mars is war. But as I had mentioned a few weeks ago, Rick Levine made a good point. Mars represents attacks and battles. Pluto represents war, and it's big time. And we also have to look to the astrology that there's much Aries focus. Aries is ruled by Mars. It only has one ruler. And Neptune, which takes 165 years to orbit, entered the cardinal fire sign of Aries right after the final eclipse in Aries on March 30th. And it will transit in Aries through October 22nd, and then it will finish its journey in Pisces and return to Aries next February. We have Saturn, which represents karma. It can denote what we're all facing in the immediate issues that, are happening for all of us. It certainly impacts people born under the sign. Saturn enters Aries at the end of the month on May 24th, also getting to the world point, meaning that it hits people on the world stage, prominent world figures, famous people, but also it hits all of us. We comprise the world stage. We are part of the world. And so it can bring major events that happen. And Neptune is still close to the world axis. Saturn will enter there at the end of May and transit there through September 1st. And Saturn and Neptune are inching very close together. And that can be things getting dissolved, structures getting dissolved in our lives, but also how do we anchor a new dream? And there is very strong Plutonian energy. It's still being emphasized. Even a story I saw, it's not as big certainly as war with India and Pakistan. That's huge news. And also the air story, I think, is pretty huge. And even last week, Zelensky and Trump meeting to try to come to some agreements. These are all world leaders, Plutonian endeavors. But there was a story that there was an attack on Jennifer Aniston's house. I guess an elderly man, and I think it was a targeted attack, drove into her house, and she was there. And she is an Aquarius. Pluto just retrograded in her sign, and that is something very chaotic and scary. And then you have another prominent person, famous people, Sean Combs, whose trial began yesterday on May 5th, just a day after Pluto retrograded. And he is a Scorpio. Pluto and Mars both rule his sign. Pluto is the modern ruler. And you're talking about very famous people involved in this case. You're talking about an abuse of power, somebody who was famous from a very young age, who used a lot of influence and power. And also all of the people involved, many of them are very prominent people in entertainment and sports and potentially politics and business and other areas. And in this case, it's difficult to pick a jury, because how do you remain unbiased about so many people whom they all know about and know very much about the story already? Most people are aware. But also, again, sexual trafficking and abuse of power and fame and, real manipulation. That's a very prominent example, and hopefully there is justice. And, what about in your own life? Were there any departures last week? Were there any major turning points or revelations of what you want to do? We have to think of the fact that today, Venus, which rules the sign of Taurus, and we are in Taurus season right now, a very fruitful time, a time to be creative, to focus on what's of value. Venus made a very good aspect to Pluto at 5:31 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and that's a harmonious aspect. That's an aspect of big money. That's an aspect of empowering your self-worth, your talents. This can be good for financial arrangements. Even though I know it's a Pluto retrograde, there was a lot of magical energy last week. And you also have Saturn and the North Node still close in the sky, still close together, bringing karmic connections. And then also remember that Venus, although it hasn't yet cleared its shadow, it did leave the sign of Pisces on April 30th, and it met up on Friday, May 2nd with Neptune at 1 degree and 8 minutes of Aries. And this is the third time that Venus and Neptune met up in the sky. They first met up on February 1st while in Pisces. They met up a second time on March 27th, the late degrees of Pisces. And this is a third and final time in a new sign. Venus is exalted and lovely in Pisces, but it had a lot of challenges, and it was retrograde, and it was washing around and swimming around with Neptune. And again, Neptune is the higher octave, could be very romantic and creative and spiritual, but it was getting challenged by Saturn and getting called to task, and also even the karmic lessons with the North Node. And Neptune can make Venus very vulnerable, and it can bring disappointment where perhaps fantasies and illusions are shattered. So in this case, we have Neptune in a whole new sign, a sign of new beginnings, requiring of all of us to come from light to be spiritual warriors. And Saturn is going to join up. They're going to meet up directly and exactly on February 20th of next year, but they're getting close, and they're going to be traveling close this summer. And this is where Aries is a new sign. Saturn is in its fall position in Aries, but it is saying, what are you going to do to get things going, to catalyze new beginnings in your life, to have confidence in yourself? Mars is the ruler of Aries. What has it been doing? Well, lo and behold, we ended a year with Mars retrograde, initially in a fire sign, sign of Leo, where it encourages you to open your heart and be passionate and creative, but still open your heart to love and to being confident in yourself. Then it returned to Cancer, where it is in its fall position, very emotional. This was on January 6th. And it's tough there. And then it remained in Cancer through April 18th. And it finally cleared its shadow on May 2nd and got to where it was on December 6th, when it retrograded at 6 degrees and 11 minutes of Leo. And it will remain in Leo through next month. And then it's going to enter the sign of Virgo. But this is about being courageous. This is about opening up your heart. And, again, the Venus-Pluto story this is during the Pluto station. So we are seeing dramatic events unfold, and we are in a time of a lot of chaos, but we are also, a lot of things we're still figuring out and understanding. And later not much, we've got Saturn entering Aries. That's another big change. That happens Saturn changes signs every 2.5 years, but it hasn't been in Aries since the mid-90s. We've got Neptune in Aries, which hasn't been there since 1861. That's a big deal. Jupiter, the planet of abundance and expansion, will enter the sign of Cancer on June 9th, and it'll be there through early July of next year. Once it does, it's going to get as far as 25 degrees of Cancer. It's exalted and fertile and magical in Cancer. It loves being there. And Uranus, the planet of ingenuity and chaos, is going to enter the sign of Gemini on July 7th and will remain there through November 7th. It's going to trine Pluto. There's going to be a lot more it's going to be a lot more innovation next year. We're just getting acclimated to all the new magic. But those are Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto at the end of last year firmly entered the sign of Aquarius. These are all masculine signs. Pluto is going back and forth from Capricorn into Aquarius from 23 to to the end of last year, November 19th of last year. Now we've got a lot of change. Saturn and Neptune and Uranus are going back and forth this year. But next year, we begin a new journey, and it's going to be exciting. And we are co-creating with this. Again, we've got Neptune close to the world axis, hitting every one of us, and tapping into new ways to be courageous, to tap into spirituality, tap into compassion, tap into creativity. Aries is a very dynamic sign. And today at 9:48 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Mercury meets up with Eris, the goddess of discord. And that occurs at 24 degrees and 59 minutes of Aries. I think I'm right. 24 degrees and 25 minutes of Aries. 24 degrees and 25 minutes. And this is interesting because Eris is Mars' sister, and she stirs things up. She gets things going. She creates chaos. It's kind of like Uranus in a way, too. But Eris is the goddess of discord. She fights for what she wants. And then Chiron is the wounded healer. Eris takes 500 years to orbit. Chiron is about 50 years. So this is unusual that they meet up, and they're going to meet up together. Chiron and Eris are going to meet up exactly on May 26th, which is going to be the day of the new moon in Gemini. And there's a lot of innovative and very intellectual opportunities in that energy. But Eris and Chiron are traveling together, and they've been working together this year. And they're going to meet up again on October 8th and again in mid-March of next year. And this is an opportunity to really delve into deep healing. And again, they're meeting up later today after the Venus-Pluto sextile, which is an opportunity. Feel your worth. Feel your self-value. The Pluto station represents a lot of change. We are in a world of much change. And yet I really feel, and there are a lot of things we don't yet know. And this is, the Saturn Neptune energy. This is, so much going on with 0 degrees of Aries, and Mercury and Venus did that retrograde where they, went back and forth from Aries, Pisces, Pisces into Aries and Aries into Pisces and back into Aries. 3 times they crossed 0 degrees of Aries, giving us a preview of Saturn and Neptune meeting up right at this point on February 20th of next year at the world point, hitting every one of us. So do healing work. We've got on May 10th, Mercury is going to change signs and enter the sign of Taurus. And it will remain in Taurus through May 25th because it's moving about 2 degrees a day. It's moving fast now. And so that's a shift. And then Mercury will square Pluto on May 12th, which will be the day of the full moon in Scorpio. So that's a good purging day, but that can be very emotional, and good day for doing a detox, good day for, we'll talk more about it later in the week. But the Aries Chiron energy is very interesting, and Mercury Chiron tonight is saying face your wounds, have courage. There's a lot of Aries energy. Neptune's there, Venus is there, Mercury's there, Eris is there, and Saturn will be there at the end of the month. And we just had the eclipses in the Aries Libra axis and finalized that at the end of March. And so good luck, and I will be back on Friday and talk about the full moon in Scorpio. And take care.